Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album, the comeback album from Weezer, titled Everything Will Be Alright in the End. It's almost a cliche these days to begin a Weezer review talking about Pinkerton. So let's indulge that cliche and be honest here, because it's an album that took Rivers Cuomo's band to a dark place, that split critics down the middle and sent fans away in droves. Now sure, the album's praised as a classic now, but it sure as hell wasn't when it was released, featuring abrasive production that had some sardonic lyrics branded Pavement Light, and lyrics that went to the uncomfortable dark recesses of Cuomo's mind, with all of its depression, absentee father figures, and myriad fears and insecurities surrounding women. Coming off of the Blue album, this was a massive change in focus, but also keep in mind, this was 1996. Sure, the underground emo crowd of the time embraced Pinkerton, but the mainstream fans that came for Say It Ain't So and Buddy Holly instead got El Scorcho and Pink Triangle amongst others. Once again, 1996. Even the Brit power pop of Oasis and Blur wasn't getting this explicit or off-kilter or uncomfortable. In a situation where the paradigm was shifting from Nirvana to Aqua, Pinkerton was unlike anything else, and that wasn't always a good thing for chart success. And its failure crushed Rivers Cuomo. He bared his soul to the world, and the world effectively spat in his face. So after a 5-year hiatus, the band came back with the Green album, and the change was stark. Not only were the heavy shields of irony in place, but the loss of Matt Sharp's subtle bass harmonies and lighter than ever production meant that the songs were all the more ephemeral, and they felt empty. For as good of a songwriter as Rivers Cuomo is, and let's make this clear, he's a very good songwriter. He can write great sticky melody lines, and is a solid songwriter in terms of lyrical poetry, but it was all a mask. And nowhere was that more vivid than on Beverly Hills, the successful Weezer comeback single that owed its airplay to the pop rock boom and nothing else, because that song is one monster riff and that's it. It's a shockingly empty sounding song, empty of ideas and real soul, two of the things Weezer used to have in spades. And from there, the next slew of Weezer albums effectively fell into that mold, with only occasional flashes of brilliance to really sustain the band as their output really petered out by the end of the decade. And so yeah, I gotta be honest, I wasn't exactly surprised to see that Weezer was returning to the original well for their newest album, Everything Will Be Alright in the End. A title making a statement to both Weezer fans and critics, the latter of whom have more than their fair share of reasons to be skeptical of this album. And I gotta admit, it was really damn hard to work up any real excitement about a new Weezer album, even a comeback album, even despite the reassurances from the band saying, no really, it's gonna be more like Pinkerton, we promise. I hate to say this, but I don't want another Pinkerton so much as I'm looking for Rivers Cuomo to actually say something that comes from someplace real, and not just empty artifice or irony or weirdness for its own sake. So, did that happen on this album? Well, I gotta say, it's really tough to figure out. Let me start by repeating the common critical consensus. Yes, this is Weezer's best album in well over a decade, and features all the things that have traditionally made Weezer very, very listenable, even when they haven't been exactly great. And yet, to some extent, I get the feeling that the expectations for this album are in a very weird, peculiar place, and that it will always be compared with their past work, both good and bad. And this can mean one of two things based upon the critics' history with Weezer. Now, those who split with them right after Pinkerton and haven't experienced the past, well, 18 years, will probably judge this album a lot more harshly than those who have been with the band every single step of the way. And here's the thing. This is not an album you can, as a listener or critic, take out of the full context of history, because thematically and lyrically, it's entrenched in that historical context. Not only is it an album filled with direct callbacks to Pinkerton, it's also one that sees Rivers Cuomo finally coming back to that earnest feelings that drove that classic record, or at least trying to peel back some of the artifice. And yet, lyrically, you can tell this album falls into three separate pieces. The songs intended to reassure longtime Weezer fans that, yes, they are going back to their original well of influences, everything was going to be alright in the end. The songs that seem to be deliberately trying to ape Pinkerton's formula, and the songs that work in the spirit of that classic album while containing some original material. And while that last category features both some of Weezer's best and most interesting songs on this album, it doesn't exactly surprise me that the other two pieces get a lot more attention, because with this sort of comeback album, it's almost expected, really. And I gotta be honest, there are also the pieces of this album that don't really land a lot of real impact with me. Now sure, a song like Back to the Shack is a straightforward message to the fans saying, yes, they're going back to their ramshackle pile of influences, and it's a good song. But when you throw in lines like, I forgot that disco sucks, which is your standard metaphorical pop shot, taking that selling out to a pop audience and not rocking out hardcore, I just couldn't help but roll my eyes, because let's face it, Weezer's always had a pop focus, even at their best. And whenever Weezer tries to go for rock or punk swagger like on Eulogy for a Rock Band or I've Had It Up to Here, it rings as just kind of hollow. The song's looking to mimic the moral ambiguity and situations of Pinkerton, like the creepy and manipulative My Lonely Girl, the petulant duet with Bethany Cosentino, Go Away, or the album opener, Ain't Got Nobody. They fare a little bit better and they do have some real nuance, but lyrically they ring as just a little bit thin and uninspired to me. While they try to call back to Pinkerton, they lack some of the descriptive flair that made that album so iconic, and reflects part of the problem with going back to that well. If you're going to repeat similar songs 18 years later and not show growth, and not do enough to take them in a fresh artistic direction, the album can feel a little bit like a retread, and a lesser one at that. It doesn't help matters that Rivers Cuomo's singing has gotten significantly less visceral, choosing to go for a really thin multi-track falsetto rather than shout or scream, and I gotta admit, it doesn't sound as potent or interesting, at least to me. Now, part of this comes back to the production and the instrumentation, with the form being handled by Rick Ocasek, who previously worked on the Blue album and the Green album. Now, at first listen, the one issue that I've got with him is mixing Rivers Cuomo's voice a little bit too low on a couple of tracks, which doesn't help his more expressive voice really stand out, at least in my view. But the larger issue comes back to the instrumentation. Rivers Cuomo's gotten a lot of mileage out of writing sticky, catchy as hell melodies, and they're all present here. And when the solos can stay on point and stick with them, you get some pretty damn solid songs. If I were to nitpick though, it's more tied to guitar tone. Weezer's been going for a rougher, fuzzier sound for a while now, in fact ever since they signed to Epitaph, and while that's good, there are points where it feels lacking in real fire beyond the heavy simmer that it develops. Now that's not saying there aren't some great moments. The chugging riff on Ain't Got Nobody, the stuttering riff, the backing vocals on I've Had It Up to Here, the melodic interplay on Da Vinci, which was really nice, the harmonica and acoustic strumming that erupts into this kick-ass bass groove on Cleopatra, the swirling heavy eruption on Foolish Father that features one of the best melodic solos on this album, and the glorious excess of the Future Scope trilogy. But I have to say, this album could have afforded to rock a little bit harder and give the guitars just a little bit more punch. It just might have worked a little better. But you know what? I will say this. There are songs on this album where Weezer and Rivers Cuomo did exactly what I was hoping he would do. Show signs of really growing up. You get fragments of it all throughout this album, with the acknowledgement that he actually made up with his father on Back to the Shack, to the steps towards independence from his issues with women on Cleopatra, and where chunks of Pinkerton felt intentionally awkward and confused as Cuomo went to uncomfortable extremes on his obsessions. Songs like Da Vinci show him at a loss for words, and taking the slightest moment of pause that you really wouldn't do if you didn't have that maturity behind you. Hell, Foolish Father is a message to a girl to reconcile with her father that highlights his love for him, their family connection, and most importantly, the father's humanity, which previously he never even would have acknowledged. It's probably my favorite song on this album because it's such a clear mirror for Rivers Cuomo getting over his own issues and acknowledging that, yeah, everything will be alright in the end, and that's okay. So look, I'm not gonna say this album is better than the Blue album or Pinkerton, because it's clearly not, but it's finally a sign that Weezer has managed to reinvigorate a formula that's given them so much success, staying power, and a real die-hard fan base. What's even better is that they've shown that they're willing to move forward, clear away some of the past, and show some real artistic evolution going forward. On that note, this album is a solid 7 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation. For the first time in a long time, Weezer's been able to reassure me that it'll all come together in the end. And for once, I actually believe him. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or anything else that, any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. If you have anything else that I might have missed about this album, put it in the comments. I'm always curious what you have to say. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.